The dust of the Oregon Trail tasted of broken promises and shallow graves. For Elara Vance, a woman fleeing the starched collars of Boston society, it was the taste of a bitter freedom. But when a freak storm scattered her wagon train and left her for dead, she found a life hanging by a thread that was not her own. There by a blood-chilled creek lay a warrior of the Stone River people, his body a canvas of fever and wounds. To help him was to invite the suspicion of her own kind and the wrath of his. To leave him was to abandon the very oath her doctor father had taught her to cherish above all else, to preserve life. She made her choice in that lonely canyon, never knowing that the man whose life she held in her hands would one day hold the fate of two peoples and her own heart before the flames of the great council fire. The sky over the plains was a merciless, empty blue, a stark contrast to the chaos that had ripped Elara Vance's world apart less than a day ago. The stampede had been a force of nature, a thundering river of hide and horn that had splintered their wagon, tossing their worldly possessions across the prairie like fistfuls of chaff. She'd been separated from the others, her horse bolting in terror. Now there was only the wind, a lonely mourner whistling through the tall grass, and the aching silence of being utterly, terrifyingly alone. Elara was not a wilting flower. Her father, Dr. Alistair Vance, had been a man of science and pragmatism, and he had raised his daughter in his image. While other Boston girls learned needlepoint, Elara learned sutures. While they practiced the pianoforte, she memorized anatomical charts and the properties of herbs. She had his medical journals, his surgical kit, and his unshakable belief that knowledge and a steady hand could conquer almost any malady. But out here, her knowledge felt small, her hands profoundly unsteady. She had followed a thin trickle of a creek, hoping it would lead to a larger river, a landmark anything other than this endless expanse of nothing. It led her instead into a narrow, stone-walled canyon, a sudden gash in the earth that offered shade and shelter. And it was there, half submerged in the frigid water, that she found him. He was a warrior of the Stone River people. She knew that from the beaded patterns on his deerskin leggings and the single eagle feather tied into his long black hair. His face was turned away, his powerful body unnaturally still. At first she thought he was dead. A deep gash, long and viciously torn, ran from his shoulder, down his side, the work of a mountain lion, she surmised. The wound was inflamed, a hellish red that spoke of the poison seeping into his blood. Her first instinct, born of 1,000 whispered warnings from the wagon master, was to back away slowly, to run. He was the other, the savage they were warned about in hushed tones around the campfire. But then a low groan escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony that cut through her fear. It wasn't the sound of a savage, it was the sound of a man in pain. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, as clear as if he were standing beside her. You do not ask the politics of a wound, Elara. You do not question the creed of a fever. You heal. Decision made, she waded into the icy water, her worn leather boots sinking into the mud. Gritting her teeth against the strain, she hauled him from the creek, his dead weight a testament to the dense muscle beneath his skin. She dragged him onto a sandy patch of ground, under an overhang, his head lolling back. His face, sharp and angular with a strong jaw and a proud nose, was slick with sweat despite the cool air. His skin was burning. "All right, Dr. Vance," she whispered to herself, the familiar title a small comfort. "Let's see the damage." She worked with desperate efficiency. Using her hunting knife, she cut away the blood-soaked deerskin, her clinical detachment, warring with a very real and personal fear. The wound was worse than she'd thought. It was deep, festering, and the man was shivering violently, his body trying to fight a battle it was clearly losing. She built a fire with trembling hands, thankful for the dry wood piled up by past floods. She boiled water in the small pot from her satchel, sterilizing her father's needles and a strip of her own petticoat. Then came the hardest part, lancing and cleaning the wound. He awoke as she began, his eyes flying open. They weren't the dull, fever-glazed orbs she expected. They were the color of dark, wet slate, and they burned with a fierce, lucid intelligence that saw everything: her fear, her determination, her pale skin and strange clothes. A powerful hand shot out and seized her wrist, the grip shockingly strong for a man so close to death. A guttural sound rumbled in his chest, a warning. "I am trying to help you," she said, her voice steady, despite the hammer in her chest. She held up the clean cloth and the needle, trying to convey her purpose. "This wound, it will kill you. I can clean it." He stared at her, his eyes searching hers, looking for a truth she could only hope he'd find. He was caught between the instinct to fight and the encroaching darkness of the infection. For a long moment, the canyon held its breath. Then slowly, with a visible shuddering effort of will, his fingers uncoiled from her wrist. His head fell back against the sand, his eyes closing, but she knew he was not unconscious. He was watching. He was trusting her. A fragile, unspoken pact had been forged in that desperate moment. For the next 3 days, the canyon was her hospital. She brewed willow bark tea to fight the fever, a trick her father had learned from an old Iroquois woman back east. She cleaned the wound twice a day, stitching the torn flesh with practiced, even movements. She hunted, using the small pistol her father had insisted she carry, bringing down 2 rabbits, which she made into a thin, nourishing broth. She forced the broth between his lips when he was too weak to move, holding his head in her lap. During his bouts of delirium, he spoke in a language that was like the rushing of a river over stones, the words tumbling out in a torrent of fevered memories. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone of loss, of anger, of a great burden. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She awoke to find him sitting up, his slate-grey eyes clear and focused on her. The fire had died to embers, and the pre-dawn chill was sharp. He had pulled a corner of her blanket over himself. He said nothing, merely watched her as she stirred the coals back to life. The silence was heavy, but no longer hostile. Later, when she brought him a cup of broth, he took it from her, his fingers brushing hers. It was a simple touch, but it sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. "What is your name?" she asked softly, not expecting an answer. He looked at her, then gestured to the hawk circling high above the canyon rim, its wings black against the pale sky. Then he tapped his chest with his fist, a gesture of solidity of the stone all around them. "Stone hawk," he said. The words were raspy, the first he had spoken in English. His voice was a low baritone, a sound that seemed to come from the very earth beneath them. "I am Ilara," she replied, a small smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. In the quiet of the canyon, surrounded by ancient stone and the endless sky, 2 worlds had collided, and in the space between them, something new and fragile and terrifyingly beautiful had begun to grow. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, a life contained entirely within the stone walls of their canyon sanctuary. The patient-healer dynamic slowly, almost imperceptibly shifted. Stonehawk's strength returned with astonishing speed. The lean, hard muscles of his arms and chest began to fill out again, and the feverish pallor was replaced by the healthy, sun-bronzed hue of his people. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He began to contribute first in small ways, He showed her how to set a snare that was far more effective than her clumsy attempts, providing them with a steady supply of game. He pointed out roots and herbs she hadn't recognized, one that soothed her sunburnt skin, another that when crushed kept the biting flies at bay. He was teaching her repaying his debt in the currency of survival. Their communication remained a tapestry of broken English gestures and a surprising amount of mutual understanding. He would point to the sun, then trace its path across the sky, with his finger telling her how his people marked time. She in turn would open one of her father's medical journals, pointing to the detailed drawings of the human body and explaining in simple terms what she had done to save him. He would listen intently, his gaze sharp and intelligent, grasping the concepts with an acuity that impressed her. One evening, as she was redressing his wound, her fingers tracing the neat line of sutures she had made, he spoke. "You have the hands of a medicine woman. My father was a doctor," she said, her voice soft. "He taught me. He was a great chief to have a daughter with such skill." Elara laughed, a sound that felt rusty in her own ears. He was not a chief, just a man. A good man. A pang of grief, sharp and familiar, pierced her. Stonehawk seemed to sense her sadness. He reached out and, with a gentleness that belied his strength, took the small carving knife from her belt. He picked up a piece of driftwood, and in the flickering firelight he began to carve. His hands, which could wield a weapon or fell a tree, moved with an artist's grace. Silently she watched as the wood chips fell away, revealing a shape within. He worked for over an hour. The only sounds were the scrape of the knife and the crackle of the fire. When he was finished, he pressed it into her hand. It was a perfect miniature hawk, its wings half spread, as if about to take flight. The detail was exquisite, each feather intricately rendered. "For you," he said. "So you do not forget the sky." She clutched the small carving, its smooth wood, warm against her palm. It was more than a gift. It was an acknowledgement. A bond. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. The trust between them was real, but Elara knew their time in this hidden Eden was finite. Sooner or later, the outside world would intrude. It did so in the form of a man named Jasper Thorne. He rode into the canyon on a magnificent black stallion, leading a pack mule. He was a handsome man, in a predatory way, with a neatly trimmed beard, eyes the color of faded denim, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He carried a new model Winchester rifle, as if it were an extension of his own arm. Well, he said, his eyes sweeping over their camp before landing on Elara, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Lost little Lady Elara instinctively moved to stand partially in front of Stonehawk, who had gone utterly still, his hand resting near the hunting knife at his belt. "We're fine," she said. Her tone clipped. Thorne's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. He swung down from his horse, his spurs jingling. His gaze flickered to Stonehawk, dismissing him with a contemptuous glance. "Keeping interesting company, I see. My name's Jasper Thorne. I own most of the land in these parts, or I will soon enough." He took a step closer to Elara, his presence overwhelming. "A woman like you shouldn't be out here alone. It's dangerous. My ranch is a day's ride from here. You'd be safe there, comfortable." The offer was laced with an unspoken implication that made Elara's skin crawl. "I'm not alone, and I'm not in need of rescue, Mr. Thorne." Thorne's eyes hardened. He looked past her at Stonehawk, his lip curling in a sneer. "You think he can protect you? He's Stone River trash. They're nothing but thieves and beggars." Before Elara could retort, Stonehawk rose to his feet. He wasn't as tall as Thorne, but he stood with a coiled intensity, a silent promise of violence that was far more intimidating than Thorne's swagger. He said nothing, but his slate-grey eyes were locked on Thorne, cold and flat as river stones. Thorne, for all his bravado, seemed to recognize the danger. He took a half-step back, his hand moving casually to the pistol on his hip. "You watch yourself, Redskin. This ain't your land anymore." He turned his attention back to Ilara. "The offer stands. When you get tired of playing nursemaid to a savage ride north, just ask for the Thorne Ranch. Everyone knows my name." With a final lingering look at Ilara, he mounted his horse and rode out of the canyon, leaving a trail of unease in his wake. "He is a snake-stone hawk," said his voice, low and guttural. "His words are poison." "I know," Ilara agreed, still shaken. The encounter had shattered the peace of their sanctuary, reminding her of the harsh realities that lay beyond the canyon walls. The true intrusion, however, came 2 days later. It came not with a swagger and a threat, but with the silent appearance of 3 warriors at the mouth of the canyon. They were from Stonehawk's tribe. Their faces painted their expressions grim. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar that pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer, stepped forward. He spoke to Stonehawk in their native tongue, his words sharp and accusing. His eyes, however, were on Ilara, filled with a venom that made Thorne's contempt seem mild. Stonehawk replied, his tone calm but firm. The scarred warrior argued, gesturing angrily toward Ilara. It was clear what was happening. They saw a white woman, an enemy, and assumed the worst. They saw her as a captor, a witch who had ensnared one of their own. Stonehawk stood his ground. Though he was still recovering, he placed himself between Ilara and the other men. He spoke with an authority that commanded their attention, if not their agreement. Finally, after a long, tense exchange, he turned to Ilara. His face was a mask of regret. "They are my kin," he said. "This one," he nodded toward the scarred man, "is Broken Fang, my father's nephew. He says I must return." Of course, Ilara said, her heart sinking. She had known this moment would come. "They do not trust you," he continued, his gaze holding hers. "They see only the color of your skin. They do not see the heart of the hawk carver." A Broken Fang barked another command. "I must go," Stonehawk said. He reached out his fingers, brushing the small wooden hawk that now hung on a leather cord around her neck. "Keep this. The sky will remember." He turned and walked toward his kinsman, his back straight and proud. He didn't look back. Ilara watched them go, the 3 warriors leading their reclaimed brother, until they were just specks, disappearing into the vast, indifferent landscape. The silence they left behind was heavier, deeper, and more profound than any she had ever known. She was alone again, but this time her heart was no longer entirely her own. It had flown away with the hawk. Leaving the sanctuary of the canyon felt like a physical expulsion from grace. Ilara packed her few belongings, the wooden hawk, a solid, comforting weight against her chest, and followed the creek north, just as Jasper Thorne had suggested. Not because she sought his help, but because any direction was better than staying. A day and a half of weary travel brought her to the edge of Blackwood Gulch. It wasn't a town so much as a raw wound carved into the landscape. A single muddy street was flanked by a collection of rough-hewn buildings, a saloon leaking boisterous noise even in the mid-afternoon, a general store, a smithy, and a dozen other clapboard shacks that housed miners, trappers, and other souls clinging to the frayed edge of civilization. The air smelled of stale beer manure and desperation. Ilara, with her Bostonian speech and her father's medical kit, was an anomaly. She secured a small disused room behind the general store from the proprietor, a harried man named Jebediah Smith, in exchange for treating a nasty gash on his arm and promising future medical services. She hung a simple shingle outside, "E. Vance, Healer." The work came quickly. It was a place of constant low-grade violence and frequent accidents. She set broken fingers for a miner, treated a case of lung fever in a trapper's wife, and stitched up a brawling cowboy who had gotten the worse end of a bottle. She asked for little in return, a few coins, a bag of flour, a slab of bacon. She earned a grudging respect from the town's women and a wary curiosity from the men. But her past, brief as it was, followed her. Jasper Thorne owned this town, if not in name, then in influence. His ranch was the largest, his cattle herds the most numerous, and his payroll supported half the men in the saloon. He found her on her third day in town. He strode into her small infirmary without knocking his large frame, filling the doorway, blocking the light. He held his hat in his hands, a gesture of politeness that was completely undermined by the possessive glint in his eye. "I knew you'd come around," he said, his voice a low, confident purr. "A smart woman like you knows where the power lies in a place like this. I came here for supplies and to find my way, Mr. Thorne." "Nothing more," Ilara replied coolly, continuing to grind herbs with a mortar and pestle. "Call me Jasper," he insisted, stepping closer. He glanced around the Spartan room. "This is no place for you. You're a lady. You belong in a proper house." "My house," he smiled. "I'm looking for a wife, Ilara, a woman of refinement, to bring some class to this God-forsaken country. You'd be the mistress of the largest ranch in the territory. It wasn't a proposal, it was a business proposition." She was an asset he wished to acquire. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Thorne, and I am not looking for a husband." His smile tightened. "Playing hard to get, I admire that. But don't take too long. My patience has its limits." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I heard stories that you were found shacked up with a Stone River buck. Some of the boys are calling you unpleasant names. An association with me would put an end to that sort of talk." He was offering her his protection, but it felt more like a threat. He was the one stoking the rumors, she was certain of it, using them to isolate her, to make her dependent on him. "I don't care what the boys are calling me," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Now, if you don't have an injury that needs tending, I have work to do." Thorne's face darkened for a second, a flash of raw fury before he masked it with a chuckle. "Fiery. I like that." He placed a small, heavy pouch on her table. It clinked with the sound of gold coins. "A donation. For your good work. To show my support." He left, and Ilara stared at the pouch as if it were a coiled snake. She knew accepting it would be the first step into a cage he was building around her. She left the pouch untouched. The rumors he'd mentioned grew worse. In the general store, women would fall silent when she entered. Men at the saloon would make lewd remarks just loud enough for her to hear. She was the Indian lover, the white woman who had chosen a savage over her own kind. Her isolation was a wall being built brick by brick, and Thorne was the architect. Her only friend was a grizzled old trapper named Silas Croft. He was a man who seemed more a part of the landscape than the town, his face a road map of wrinkles, his clothes smelling of pine smoke and leather. He'd lived in these lands for 40 years, long before Blackwood Gulch existed, and he spoke of the Stone River people with a respect no one else did. He found her one evening by the creek on the edge of town, skipping stones across the water. "Don't let Thorne get under your skin," Silas said, his voice like gravel. "He's a man who mistakes owning things for being strong, thinks he can brand a woman the same as he does a steer. He's turning the whole town against me." Ilara confessed, her voice weary. "This town," Silas snorted. "This town's a powder keg, girl, and Thorne's got a fistful of lit matches. He wants the Stone River people's land. Says there's gold in their sacred hills. He's been trying to provoke them for months, poisoning their waterholes, running off their game. He wants an excuse to get the cavalry involved, to have them wiped out or moved on. The cold dread that washed over Ilara was sharp and specific. This wasn't just about her. It was about Stone Hawk. They are a proud people. Silas continued staring off into the distance toward the hills that marked the Stone River territory. Their chief grey bear is old and wise. He's kept the peace. But he's ailing. His son. They say he's a strong leader, but there are others who hunger for war. A warrior called Broken Fang, mostly. He preaches hate for the white man. One more push from Thorne, one more unfortunate incident, and this whole valley will go up in flames. Ilara looked down at the wooden hawk in her hand, which she now kept tucked inside her dress. The fragile piece of the canyon felt a world away, a dream from another life. She was no longer just a healer trying to survive. She was a piece on a board in a deadly game she didn't understand. Jasper Thorne was one wolf circling her, trying to claim her. But out there in the hills, another wolf Broken Fang was preaching war, and caught between them all was Stone Hawk, the man she had saved, the man whose fate was now inextricably, terrifyingly tangled with her own. The fragile piece of the valley shattered a week later. It began with a sick child. A young boy from the settlement, Jimmy was brought to Ilara by his frantic mother. His skin was clammy, his stomach cramped, and he was racked with a violent sickness. Within hours, 2 more people arrived with the same symptoms. It was a severe dysentery, but its sudden clustered appearance was alarming. It's the creek, Ilara told Silas Croft later that day, her face grim. She had traced the source. All the afflicted families drew their water from the same downstream bend. Something's in the water. Silas's weathered face tightened. Not something. Someone. His meaning became terrifyingly clear the next morning, when a rider galloped into town from an outlying homestead, his face pale with terror. He'd found 2 Stone River hunters dead by a waterhole a few miles north. They weren't killed by arrows or bullets. They were curled on the ground, their faces contorted in agony near a water source that fed the same creek system. Jasper Thorne was the first to act, his voice booming with manufactured outrage in the center of town. It's the savages, he declared to the gathered crowd of nervous settlers and miners. They've poisoned the water. Trying to kill us all in our beds, they've gone too far this time. The lie was so blatant, so perfectly twisted, it took Ilara's breath away. The Stone River people revered the land and its water. They would never poison it. It was their lifeblood. But fear is a more potent drink than logic. The crowd, already simmering with suspicion and resentment, began to boil. Men grabbed their rifles, their faces hard, with a righteous fury Thorne had expertly ignited. We need to ride out there and teach them a lesson they won't forget, one of Thorne's ranch hands yelled, and the crowd roared in agreement. Ilara pushed her way through the mob until she stood before Thorne. "You're lying!" she shouted, her voice ringing with conviction. "Why would they poison a water source that they also use? It makes no sense. This is your doing, Thorne. This is the incident you've been waiting for." Thorne looked down at her, a mask of pity on his handsome face. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "your affection for those people is clouding your judgment. They are desperate. They see us as invaders. This is their way of fighting back, a coward's way." He had twisted her compassion into a weapon against her credibility. The crowd jeered. "Indian lover," someone shouted. "Go back to your bravery." She was shouting into a hurricane. Defeated, she watched as Thorne organized a posse, a grim collection of vigilantes fired up on whiskey and fear, ready to deliver what they called justice. Silas Croft caught her arm and pulled her away. "There's no talking sense to a lynch mob," he growled. "They'll ride to the Stone River camp, find the first person they see, and that'll be all the proof they need." "We can't let that happen," Ilara said, her mind racing. "Innocent people will be killed." "Stone Hawk." His name caught in her throat. "Grey Bear, their chief, he's a man of peace," Silas said, his eyes scanning the hills. "But his influence is fading. Broken Fangs will use this. He'll tell his people it was the whites who poisoned the water to kill them. He'll call for war." Thorne gets exactly what he wants, a massacre with the Stone River people painted as the aggressors. It was a perfect diabolical trap, and both sides were walking right into it. "There's only one person who might listen to reason," Ilara said, the realization dawning on her. "Grey Bear. He has to be warned. He has to know this is Thorne's plot." Silas looked at her, his old eyes weighing the incredible risk. To ride into the Stone River camp now as a white woman was suicide. But he also saw the iron resolve in her jaw, the same determination he'd bet she'd had when she chose to drag a dying warrior from a creek. "You can't go alone," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Then you'll have to show me," the way she replied. As Thorne's posse rode east with loud boasts and the gleam of rifle barrels, Ilara and Silas slipped out of the north end of town, riding hard for the sacred hills of the Stone River people. They rode not as aggressors, but as messengers carrying a desperate truth into the very heart of a gathering storm. Ilara's heart pounded with every hoofbeat. She was no longer just a healer. She was a diplomat, a conspirator, a woman riding to prevent a war, and perhaps, if she was honest with herself, to save one particular man from the flames. The wooden hawk beneath her dress felt less like a memento, and more like a lodestone, pulling her inexorably toward a fate she could no longer outrun. The journey into the Stone River territory was like passing through a veil into another world. The rolling plains gave way to rugged, pine-studded hills, and deep, silent valleys that seemed to watch them with ancient eyes. Silas moved through the terrain with the quiet confidence of a man returning home, pointing out landmarks invisible to Ilara's untrained eye. They were discovered as Silas knew they would be long before they reached the main camp. 4 warriors materialized from the trees, silent as ghosts, their horses blocking the path. Their faces were grim, their bows drawn. Ilara's heart leapt into her throat. Silas raised a hand, palm open in the universal sign of peace. He spoke to them not in English, but in a series of fluid hand signs. Ilara watched, fascinated, as a complex, silent conversation took place. He pointed to her, then made a sign that involved touching his own heart, and then mimicking the shape of a bird. The warriors' expressions did not soften, but one of them grunted and gestured for them to follow. The Stone River camp was nestled in a wide, protected valley, a collection of hide lodges arranged in a great circle. Smoke from dozens of cook fires curled into the evening air. The place was humming with a tense, angry energy. As they were led through the camp, every eye turned to them. Faces were filled with hatred and suspicion. A woman spat on the ground near Ilara's horse. Thorne's poison had reached here, too. They were brought to the largest lodge, where 2 guards stood with spears. After a few moments, they were beckoned inside. The air in the lodge was thick with the scent of sage and buffalo hide. A low fire burned in the center, casting dancing shadows on the painted skins that lined the walls. On a raised pallet of furs sat an old man, his face a stunning tapestry of wrinkles, his long white hair braided with otter fur. Despite his frailty, he radiated an aura of immense dignity and power. This was Chief Grey Bear, and standing beside him, his face a mask of stone, was Stone Hawk. His eyes widened in shock when he saw Ilara. For a heartbeat, a flicker of an emotion she couldn't decipher. Relief, anger, fear crossed his face before it was shuttered again. Beside him, Broken Fang stood, his scarred lip curled in a triumphant sneer. "The White Witch comes into our camp," Broken Fang spat in heavily accented but clear English for Ilara's benefit. "Has she come to finish her work? To poison the rest of us? We have come to speak the truth." Silas said, his voice respectful but firm, addressing the chief. "The man Thorne in the white man's town is the one who poisoned the water. He killed your hunters and his own people to start a war." Grey Bear listened, his ancient eyes fixed on Silas, then on Ilara. His gaze was heavy searching. "Why should we believe the words of a white woman?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "One who is promised to this man Thorne." Ilara's head snapped up. "What, no, that's a lie. Broken Fang's scouts have watched the town, Stone Hawk," said his voice, flat, emotionless. "They saw Thorne visit you. They saw him leave his gold in your house. They heard the talk that you would be his wife." The blood drained from Ilara's face. Thorne's donation, his public courting, it hadn't just been to trap her. It had been to discredit her in the eyes of the Stone River people. It was a move of stunning, cruel genius. "He is a liar and a manipulator," Ilara pleaded, looking directly at Stonehawk. "He wants your land. Silas knows it. I know it. He is trying to make you fight so the soldiers will come." "She speaks with a forked tongue," Broken Fang snarled. "She is Thorne's woman. She saved you, my cousin, only to learn our weaknesses. She is his spy." The accusation hung in the air, vile and potent. The logic, twisted as it was compelling. Ilara felt a wave of despair. How could she fight this? Grey Bear coughed a deep, rattling sound that shook his frail body. He looked from Ilara to his son. "Stone Hawk, you were with this woman. You looked into her heart. What do you see there?" The entire lodge was silent. Every eye was on Stone Hawk. He stood torn between the woman who had saved his life and the undeniable evidence his cousin presented. His face was a battlefield of conflicting loyalties. Ilara's heart ached for him, for the impossible position they were all in. "I see." Stone Hawk began, his voice strained. "I see a woman who fought death to save me when she could have left me to die. I do not believe she is a liar. Your heart has been softened by a white woman's touch." A Broken Fang roared, stepping forward. "You are not fit to lead. Our warriors cry out for vengeance for our murdered brothers. While you speak of believing a spy, Thorne's war party rides for our lands. We must strike them now before they strike us." He was winning. Ilara could feel the tide of opinion in the lodge turning toward war. Grey Bear seemed to shrink the weight of his people's anger too much for his failing strength. Suddenly the flap of the lodge was thrown open. A young brave, his face streaked with sweat, stumbled in. "Chief," he panted, "the White Riders. They are here. They have set fire to the western grazing lands." Chaos erupted. Broken Fang let out a triumphant war cry. "The time for talk is over. Now we fight." He stormed from the lodge, and the other warriors followed, their voices rising in a chilling chorus of anger. Only Grey Bear, Stone Hawk, Silas, and Ilara remained. The old chief seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of moments. He looked at his son, his eyes filled with deep sorrow. "It has begun," Grey Bear whispered, "and I am too weak to stop it." He began to cough again, a violent, racking spasm. He slumped forward, and Stone Hawk rushed to his side. Ilara, her healer's instincts taking over, knelt beside him. She felt his pulse. It was faint and thready. His breathing was shallow. The old chief was dying. "He is not strong enough for this," she said softly to Stone Hawk. Stone Hawk looked at her, his eyes filled with anguish. His father was dying. His people were riding into a trap, and the woman he trusted was accused of being the agent of their destruction. The weight of the world was on his shoulders. "They will not listen to me now," he said, his voice rough with despair. "Broken fangs have hearts. He will lead them to their graves." Outside, the war cries grew louder, a terrifying prelude to the bloodshed to come. The great council fire would be lit tonight, not for wisdom, but for war. And as Greybear's life faded, the last hope for peace seemed to be fading with him. The night descended on the valley like a shroud. In the center of the camp, a massive bonfire was built, its flames leaping high into the darkness, a crucible for the tribe's grief and fury. Chief Greybear was gone, his passing leaving a vacuum of power at the worst possible moment. A new leader had to be chosen to face the coming storm. Before the entire tribe, 2 men stood ready to claim the title: Broken Fang, the voice of righteous war, and Stone Hawk, the son of the fallen chief. Broken Fang spoke first, his voice a thunderous roar that played on the tribe's fear. "The time for peace is dead," he cried, pacing before the flames. "It died with our brothers at the poisoned waterhole. It burns with our lands to the west. The white man, Thorne, sends his riders, and Greybear's son brings Thorne's witch into our very camp." He pointed a damning finger at Elara, who stood with Silas at the edge of the circle, a prisoner in all but name. "Stone Hawk speaks of trust, while our enemies sharpen their knives," Broken Fang sneered. He let this woman cloud his mind and weaken his spirit. "I say we need a hawk who strikes. I say we ride tonight. We will wash the mud of Blackwood Gulch with the blood of our enemies and burn their town to the ground. For our fallen brothers, for Greybear." He raised his spear, and a deafening war cry erupted from the warriors. They were his. He had stoked their pain into a raging inferno. Elara's heart plummeted. They would all die in the war Thorne had engineered. Then Stonehawk stepped forward. He did not shout. He stood tall, his father's dignity settling upon him like a mantle. His clear voice cut through the lingering cries of war. "Broken Fang is right," he began, stunning the crowd into silence. "My heart burns with anger. But he offers you a warrior's death. I ask you, is it a wise one he moved with purpose? He says the white man poisoned our water, yet we who drink from our wells are not sick. It was a trap meant to turn all whites against us, and us against all whites. He says this woman is a spy." Stone Hawk continued his gaze, finding Elara. "I say she is the healer who tore her own clothes for my bandages and used her strange medicine to pull my spirit back from the Shadowlands. To declare war on all white people because of the snake, Thorne is to be blind." His voice rose with passion. "Thorne wants us to attack. He has told the army we are savages. When we ride into his trap, the soldiers will be waiting to destroy us. He will win, and our people will be buried beneath the ashes of his victory." Words Broken Fang roared, seeing his power slip. "You are a coward, hiding behind a woman's skirts." He shoved Stone Hawk, a clear public challenge. Tradition demanded a trial of combat. The spirits would choose the true chief. The circle widened as the 2 men were handed war clubs. Broken Fang lunged a wild, powerful swing fueled by pure rage. Stonehawk, leaner and faster, ducked the blow. The fight was a brutal, swift dance of fury versus focus. Broken Fang attacked with a flurry of crushing blows, but Stonehawk evaded and parried, weathering the storm, letting his cousin's rage exhaust itself. The moment came when Broken Fang overextended on a wild swing. In that split second of imbalance, Stonehawk moved. He dropped his club, stepped inside his cousin's guard, and used a swift, precise strike to Broken Fang's elbow, forcing him to drop his weapon. A leg sweep sent the larger man crashing to the ground. Before Broken Fang could recover, Stonehawk was on him, his knife pressed against his cousin's throat. The tribe held its breath. The fire crackled, the only sound in a world gone silent. Stonehawk looked down at his defeated cousin, not with triumph, but with sorrow. "Blood has been spilled," he declared, pressing the blade just enough to draw a single crimson drop. "Let it be the last." He stood and offered a hand to Broken Fang. Humbled, his rival took it and allowed Stonehawk to pull him to his feet. A great cheer of relief and victory rose from the crowd. Stonehawk had proven his strength, not just by winning, but by showing mercy. He was without question their chief. But his first act stunned them into silence once more. He ignored the elders and warriors walking past the fire with his eyes fixed on one person. The crowd parted as he strode directly to Elara. The new chief stood before the white woman, making his entire tribe wait. Then he took her hand, his strong fingers lacing through hers, and held them up for all to see. "This woman is not our enemy," he declared, his voice a chief's proclamation. "She is not our prisoner." He pulled her closer to his side. "She is the heart of my heart. She is my wife. She is at Stone River now." The shocking pronouncement settled over the tribe. He had not just chosen a wife, he had made an outsider, the very catalyst for the conflict, their chief's woman, a part of them. He immediately consolidated his audacious move with swift commands, sending a humbled Broken Fang with 10 warriors not to attack Thorne, but to watch him turning his rival's aggression into a useful tool. He dispatched others to fight the fires and scout for soldiers, transforming the war party into a disciplined defense force. Only then did he lead Elara away from the prying eyes toward the chief's lodge. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken questions. "You had no right," Elara whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't just declare me your wife." "In your world, no," he said, his voice softer now, weary from the night's trials. "In mine, it was the only way to protect you. As a prisoner, you were a target. As a guest, a suspicion. But as the chief's wife, you are untouchable. You are sacred. I saw no other path that kept you alive, and my people from a war that would have destroyed them. It was cold, hard, political logic, but it did little to calm her racing heart. And what if I don't want to be your wife?" A shadow of pain crossed his features. "The proclamation gives you my name and my protection. I will not force you further. If you wish to leave, I will have you guided safely away. No one will stop you." He was giving her a real choice. The public declaration had been a necessity of leadership. The private truth was up to her. Elara looked at the man before her, the warrior she had healed, the leader who had gambled everything on her character. She thought of the stifling life she'd fled in Boston and the predatory world of Blackwood Gulch. She had been running for so long, searching for a place to belong. Here she had saved a life and helped prevent a war. She mattered. "And if I stay?" she asked softly. He stepped closer, his presence filling the lodge. "If you stay," he murmured gently, touching the wooden hawk at her neck, "you will be our healer, a wise woman to our people. You will be the chief's counsel. You will be Elara of the Stone River. My Elara." She looked into his eyes and saw the long, hard road ahead. But for the first time, she did not feel alone. It would not be an easy life, but it would be a real one. "I will stay," she said, her voice clear and steady. A slow, genuine smile transformed his face. He reached out, not as a chief, claiming his property, but as a man reaching for his partner, and gently cupped her face in his hands. The pact made in a desperate canyon was now sealed forever in the heart of a great nation. And so, the story of Elara Vance, the Boston Healer, and Stone Hawk, the new chief of the Stone River people, didn't end at the council fire, but truly began. Their union became a legend in the territory, a story whispered by settlers in dusty towns and told by elders to wide-eyed children on cold winter nights. It was a testament to a love that refused to be defined by borders, by prejudice, or by fear. They faced down land-hungry ranchers, corrupt government agents, and the lingering suspicions of both their peoples. Ilara's medicine and Stone Hawk's wisdom became a powerful force, creating a fragile but enduring peace in a valley that had been destined for bloodshed. Theirs was not a fairy tale of the untamed West, but a real, gritty story of survival courage and the radical idea that a bridge between two worlds is stronger than any wall. If this story of the wild frontier captured your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who loves a grand tale. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next story from the annals of the American West. Thank you for listening.